Okay, we are recording. So today we are going to touch base on our recursive algorithms, see where we're at with those. I feel like, and I hate the term extra credit, we need to change this across all of our curriculum, but I feel like check matching leaves is one of those functions that, once you see a solution to it, you'll be like, okay, that's cool, and it'll help you prepare you for next week. So I may table the check matching leave stuff for tomorrow so I can dive deeper into this keyword, which is what I want to talk about right now. How does that sound to everybody? Or are you guys just dying for a solution to check matching leaves at this point? I don't know. I feel like 2 hours, if you've never been exposed to anything like this, especially with recursion, I don't know if it's sufficient enough time between the time you got back from lunch and now to give you a solution on this. I want you to sort of suffer through it a little bit more. I didn't want to sleep anyway. Well, you should sleep. Ow, I just banged my elbow. I think that was a premonition. The funny bone gets banged. Okay, I'll let you suffer. Okay. If you have been stuck on it for the last hour, go ahead and move on to this keyword this evening as you go about with this. Okay, so this will be one of those where you watch me talk about some stuff and then I'll task you to do a couple of things. So right now, I love it. Right now, I want you to sort of just sit back and not follow along. But in a minute, I'm going to ask you to pull up a text editor like a blank Quokka page, which is what I'm going to do right here. And we'll call this this.js. Save it to your Lambda files, CS6. Okay, let me make sure that I have all of my toy problems that I always do like the same toy problem when I teach about this keyword, but often I need an example to help me remember how I taught it last time. So let me just grab that. By the way, I want to see your emoji of how you're feeling after. So far, you've completed one full module, right? There's, 26 weeks, 12 in the web development curriculum with a week solo break. But I want to know your emoji of your how you're feeling right now. Sleepy. Nice. Little dance hands, little jazz hands for Barrett. Or I think that emoji is actually a hug. I like the triple thinky brain. It's typically how I feel. Yeah, you're running fast. Cool. Okay. So when I teach this, what the crap is this? What is this? Okay. This is a keyword that we use in JavaScript to define and talk about syntax, okay? Talk about context, I mean. The idea of context. What is context? Well, this keyword really literally means nothing until it has some context that can be bound to. And I gave that example earlier about your friend who came over and was playing D&D with you and your friends and eating dinner. And in the middle of the evening, he just stands up and says, "I don't like this." Now, if you are not in that room, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to understand what your friend is referring to, if anything that's important around you. Even if he just said, "I don't like this," you may look around the room and be like, well, you don't like that my dog pooped on the carpet, or you don't like the lentil chili that I made you, or you don't like that roll of the D20 die. Like, which is it? Okay. Now I want you to just think about that in the English language. We do that all the time. We provide context in stories even in written English. If you're talking to, like with another person, you don't always have to have a context that said, well, Ryan said this, Johnny said this, Ryan then said this, Johnny then said that, then after Ryan said this, then Johnny said that, right? We use he or she, or, we use pronouns, right? So this is a keyword that allows you to provide context to where your functions and objects are being created and called. So this does not get assigned until until there's some sort of context attached to it. Okay, and the best way to go about like what this does and what it is you think about it that this, okay, this will always point to an object. Okay, so it's a way to reference an object without having to say, I want to know all about my object dot whatever, I want to be able to basically offload this to my compiler, to my computer, and say this dot foo, or whatever it may be, right? And when you get into classical programming with React.js, we use class all the time, okay? We do one more zoom in there. So you get into this idea that like it just is overwhelming when you're inheriting properties from other objects, okay? So objects, just in any object-oriented programming language, which JavaScript is one of them. People ask, well, what is JavaScript? Is it functional? Is it object-oriented? Well, it's both. That's the funny part about it, is that you can, there's limitations to its functional capability, but we use functions as first-class citizens in JavaScript, just the same way that we use objects. Okay, now when you go and create an object is when you basically are allowed to figure out from within that object what type of properties a child of that object should have. So you can think of it in this parent-child paradigm. Okay. Now, if you're coming from a classical language like Java, you are going to get burned when you start to think that the class keyword is exactly the way that you know it and know it to be from Java. Okay, it's very, very different, and it behaves with this prototypal syntax. So we're going to get into that towards the end of this lection, or this lecture. I almost election. No, we're good. So we're gonna get into that. So don't worry too much about that for now. But right now, what you should be concerned about is the 4 different sort of side effects of this. Okay, what allows us? They're hints that allow us to see what this keyword is attached to in whatever context. Okay, so if I had a function, and this is just watch me, don't follow along. If I had a function that simply was, say name, and it's going to take in a name when I call it, and it's going to say return name. Okay, now before this return, if I console.log this, we would figure out exactly what this points to. Okay, and once again, it's all about context. Remember, I am in I'm using Quokka, so it's using a node context, okay? So it's going to be a little different when I go and invoke sayName with the name Ryan. We're going to be able to see what this points to, which is the global console object. Check it out. Okay, so this, if I actually console.log, we're not really concerned about the name Ryan. Like, don't worry about it right now. This is just like whatever. This is just a cool say name, like Ryan. It would say it if I console logged, but we're more concerned about this console log in this sentence, okay? Because we're console logging the entire this object, the keyword that is used to point to the global object that's referenced, okay? So from within the scope of this function, we are referencing the global function. What is that actually? How is that possible with JavaScript? What is the principle that I've taught you, and you had a file named this the last 2 days? Hoisting is it uses hoisting, but this is pointing to the global object outside of the function scope, and we have a closure, right? Well, it's closure wrapped, this, we're pointing to an object outside. A reference, we're not necessarily pointing to a variable. So if I had, const foo equals bar, so you can think of it in the same type of paradigm where our function has no clue where this is defined in this context, right? Because we're just calling a function within the global context. The global context being the global scope. This function is not nested anywhere or anything. And so what is this going to do? Well, you can think of it this way. It's going to say, hey, what is this? Oh, I don't function say name. You don't know what this is. So let's look outside the scope chain and let's find out what this points to. And let's print that thing to the console, which is this giant object. So this looks a little different if I copy and paste this into a Chrome. So remember, if you're gonna be able to learn how to debug code or anything, you're gonna need to know the Chrome debug tools. So you can right click on any web page, and you can do this any page you want. Let's go to GitHub and let's look at the elements under GitHub. So you can start to look at div elements that are on the page and figure out, okay, there's the header. The header is this thing up here, this black thing, right? So it's you just got all these styles and stuff too. Okay, so this is how you would go and debug a web page. You look and see what it is. If I wanted to change the background, I'm tired of this background being this background. I'm going to change it to periwinkle. I don't know how to spell periwinkle. We'll just go with antique. No, we'll go with Alice Blue. Look at that. So I changed this background of my header to Alice Blue. It's kind of hard to see that one, so we will go back to like a blue. Yeah, so see, I can basically start, just and if I refresh the page, it's going to go away. So if I hadn't given you a refresher on the Chrome DevTools till now, I kind of feel bad. But that's kind of what they do, and when I pull up the console, I can run JavaScript right here in my console. So I can paste a code right here. This is the console. It's just a JavaScript console, so it gives me a runtime environment for JavaScript. So now I can say, what does this point to? This console.log printed out this window object. Function say name is like, I don't know because it's not defined in this context, so I'm going to just point it to the global window object. Okay? Which if I just type in this keyword, it's going to do the same thing. If I console logged this just like that, just kind of how I did, it's pointing to, originally by default, this keyword points to window. Or in a node environment, it points to this console object, okay? So two very different runtime environments there. Up until about 9 years ago, we didn't have JavaScript in multiple environments. Well, we kind of did, but Node came about as the Google Chrome's V8 engine that powers Google Chrome. Basically, somebody was allowed to take that engine and basically turn that engine into a node, into a server environment. So you can run Node on the server. So anytime that I'm running Quokka, I'm running it in a Node environment. Anytime that I come here to my terminal, I'm not inside of a browser, I'm inside of an application that runs the terminal off my computer, and I type in Node, I am running JavaScript on a different environment. Like my computer is executing the ability to say 2 minus 2 and give you some sort of output. Okay, that is JavaScript in two different contexts. So I just need to make sure that I could clear that up. So this keyword will point to the global object that it's assigned to at runtime, at the time you tell it to. So if I were to say that there was some sort of principle guiding this behavior, this would be our first principle. And this is principle 1 of this keyword. So let's give you some some comments here. This keyword, 4 principles. Not principal, principle. Okay? And the term principle is subject to multiple opinions. I like to call them principles because they're sort of what helps us find out what this is pointing to. If you're a philosophy major like Ivan Mora, one of your instructors, he would argue that these aren't principles or rules at all. And so, okay. All right, let's talk about this keyword. Okay, so this first principle is, what is this pointing to? So that's the question you need to ask. Like, where are we calling this? Where are we calling this keyword? Well, it's in this functional environment, and there's really nothing else that it's pointing to. So it's just logging out the window. So the first principle is that this will point to the window or global object. When in the global scope, the value of this will be the window or console object. That's our first binding principle, like what it is that's going to bind us. And I'm going to draw these from a very popular JavaScript instructor, evangelist named Tyler McGinnis. So I actually, in the repo, I give you a link to his article about this very thing. Okay, he does a very good job at explaining this. All right, this keyword. In fact, I learned from him directly how he taught me how to code. So cool dude. Okay, so that's the first principle, and this is how he taught me this, by the way. So this is how I learned it. This is how you're learning it, and this is how he teaches it to hundreds and hundreds of thousands of JavaScript learners and followers. He's the guy who wrote React.js program. So very cool dude. Alrighty. So so that's the global, that's principle one. We're attaching this to the global window object. It just is doing that by default. Okay. So that is principle number one. Let's look at number two, and let's clear our output so that we don't have anything in the console that's bugging us. Okay. So the second principle is what we like to call implicit binding. So binding that is going to be implied within the scope of a function. Okay. So principle two. Implicit binding. Okay, and the way that this looks is from within an object. Now we've already seen this. I've given you an example of this before. If I have the example of, I always do this, my object. It's just the object. I'm going to call it me object this time. So if I have this example that is the me object that is defining who I am, I'm going to have some sort of like, I don't know. I'm going to say that I have like a greeting. I'll just use the example that I have written down because it's I don't want to stray off the path here. So my greeting is going to be talking about is going to be like my greeting is going to be hello. I speak English. That's my greeting. Okay, so I'm going to say that's my greeting. All right. Now if I have a function in here that I can call the me object and say hello to my little friend, right? And I'm gonna, when I invoke that object, I'm going to pass it a name, just my first name, okay? And then I'm going to console.log. I'm going to console.log this.greeting. My name is Neme. And then we can console log this keyword and talk about it. So that's all this function is going to do. Very similar to this function up here. We're just going to console log this, and then we're going to return name. So now we've just nested this function on an object literal. So if I want to invoke this function, what do I have to do to invoke, say, hello? I'm going to invoke it with my name, but what do I need to do? Since it's on an object, what do I have to do? I have to reference the object somehow. I'm not sure what DPT is. Does that come from Python? Maybe it's typo. Okay. By the way, if you want to delete anything that you say in Slack, let's do a little Slack overkill lesson here. You can just come and click on the triple dots and hit delete. If you want to edit the thing that you just said, because I had a typo, you can press up. Up will allow you to edit that last line that you were just talking about. Okay. All right. So yes, somebody said it. Me object. Somebody said mew dot say hello, but I believe that was a typo as well. All right. So what is this pointing to? We've bound this to an object. What object is this pointing to? Left of the dot. Exactly. It's an implicit bind. Sometimes I don't get a chance to eat lunch right when you guys go to lunch. get deep into meetings and curriculum development and stuff. So, okay. So this is the second rule. We have an implicit binding here. Why is it implicit? What does that word even mean? You hear this word in programming all the time. Implicit is the opposite of explicit, right? But what is the derivative? What's the word like derive? What's like the root word that we're I almost said the root word. Implied. Okay, there's an implied binding here to our this keyword. And I can't say implication. The implicit binding happens in the sense that we're not telling this to point to anything. This is finding out what it should be based on the context. And from within a function that lives in an object, and then we're referencing that object, this would be bound to that object that's getting referenced. Okay? So the principle here is anytime you want to ask, if somebody asks you, like, what is this pointing to? Well, right here, you don't really know. Well, you're going to be able to imply that it's going to point to me object. But it's going to get set and implied to this me object because we reference the me object when we call say hello. Okay? So anytime you see a function invoked where it's invoked from the left of the dot, is the left of the dot of where it's being invoked is going to be that what this keyword gets, what it refers to. I could do the same thing and pass in a different name. We'll just do that. We'll just pass in, hello, Newman. Hello, my name is Newman. Okay? Hello, my name is Ryan. So Newman, well, that's different. That's not truly, okay, so they're both pointing to literally the same thing. So that was a bad example. Let me do this. Let me recreate this example in a second way. Okay, so I want to say you object. Now we have two different objects, and this is pointed to two different objects. They're saying, well, hello, hello, my name is Ryan, and hello, your name is Newman. Kind of, once again, I chalk this up to the contrived example series of Ryan's playbook. All right, so fun. That's fun stuff. So that's how we interpret what's going to get this in this context, is find out where we're invoking this function and find the left of the dot, and that's what this is bound to. So we're going to say that whenever a function is called by a preceding dot, the function left of the dot gets this, or is this context. Okay, so it's all about context, right? Two very similar functions. One is defined within the global scope, and one is a function that's defined within an object's local scoped. Okay, why is this useful? You're about to find out, or when perhaps. It's useful when you're creating objects that inherit from other objects, and we're going to get into the most useful pertinence of this keyword. It's most useful when you're dealing with object-oriented programming. So yeah, I would add, and even when adding items to an object as well. So let's talk about that next implicit, or the new binding. Okay. So we're going to skip over explicit binding for a second. We're going to talk about, in fact, to be honest, I think this is the most commonly used. Well, I don't want to say that because React is so huge and we're using it with classes and never mind. But this is probably one of the more commonly used versions of this, right? If, yeah, so, but we're going to talk about object creation right now. And so it's going to make a little bit more sense as to why this can be potentially useful, okay? So let us get into an object. object function that is, you know, a constructor function that creates objects when it's called, okay? So I'm going to say function, and I need the function keyword here. Notice all of our functions have the function keyword here, okay? The fat arrow function gets its own blocking scope. So it cannot, it's very hard. You have to do explicit binding when you're using the arrow function in order to pass in the right stuff. We're going to go with the example that I have written down that's called cordial person example, okay? So it's a function. I know that this is a constructor function by simply reading this because it's capitalized. This capitalization is telling me that this function is, and it's not syntax, it's just convention. It's JavaScript nomenclature and convention, but it's not syntax, because you could write your functions with uppercase all the time. But when you have an uppercase function, usually it's going to be a function that's used to create an object. Okay? And this object that we're going to pass in is a greeter. So somebody who's going to be greeting, it's a cordial person who's going to greet people when they use this object. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I'm going to create a few things here. So I'm going to say this.greeter name equals greeter. So the object that I pass in. And actually, this is not just going to be an object. I'm just going to make this a string. And then I can say something to the effect of this dot greeting can be hello for now. That works for now perfectly. Okay. And then within this context, so why am I using the this keyword here? Well, I'm building a constructor function. And this constructor function is going to create objects when it is called. So it needs to know about the this keyword. So when this function gets invoked, I'm going to be using this thing, this is our third principle, with the new keyword. And so we're going to call this something like new binding. Cool, we'll call it that. I think that's what Tyler calls it anyway. Cool. And then we're going to say something to the effect of this dot, say, we'll just say speak equals, everyone uses this example, but it's fine. Equals a function. Notice I'm not using colons here, right? This isn't an object. This is a function that returns an object, okay? And it's going to know what to return because of this keyword being in it and because I use the new keyword when I create an object from it, okay? So I can take this function, I can say console.log, and this dot, not capital this dot greeting, comma, this dot greeter. It's a terrible example. Let's see, this dot greeter, we should say like, we should do like a greeter, greetee, but yeah, it's just too, yeah, it's a lot. Okay, and then we're going to console.log this from within this speak function. So I'm going to make an object. Okay, this is an object, right? But I'm going to make an object using the new keyword, and that is going to bind out what gets saved on this. And you're going to see this happen in a very magical, wonderful way. And your life is going to be changed forever because of it. So now I can say something like const Jerry equals, and we want Jerry to say new cordial person. We want Jerry, this is why I wanted to change maybe the syntax or the grammar in here, but oh well. So Jerry's greeting Newman. And then let's console.log Jerry. Cool, check it out. So look at how different this object is than the object that we had created above. The difference is we can tell that this object was created from our cordial person constructor, okay? So this function allows us to pass in some sort of stuff, and greeter is going to get set on greeter name. Oh, I need to do that. Greeter name. There we go. That's what I wanted to show. It's a little bit better to look at. Yep, you're absolutely right, Troy. I mean, great minds. Okay, so we're looking at this in this way that we have now called the new keyword, which is your key. Your new keyword is like a light bulb should go off in your mind because you're going to automatically know what this is pointing to. Okay, and this is going to be pointing to the context of where the new keyword was called. So if I was to refactor this and pass in an object, it's going to point to, so because look at that. So let's call speak real quick just so you can see it. So I'm going to call Jerry.speak. And let's see, Jerry's speak function gives us hello Newman, and the object it's pointing to is this cordial person object. The instance of it, okay? So, but let's change up this a little bit in such a way that our greeting will be supplied, and let's say this dot greeter equals options dot greeter. And we're going to change this to be options. And we're going to change this to be the greeter is Jerry and the greeted is going to be Newman. That's so weird. Now that I look at greeted all over the place, it looks weird. Okay, so now I can pass in an object to our cordial person where we have those two properties. So the greeted gets Newman, and the greeter is Jerry. So that's the object that we're pointing to now, right? So look at this. Greeted, a cordial person, is pointing to this object that gets passed in, this object right here. So so it's now saying hello undefined because this is not bound to anything called greeter name. So we're going to say hello greeted this dot greeted. This can say hello Newman, and then I can put this dot. So we know who said it. The greeter and the greeted. Hello Newman, and then we know it was Jerry. And then we can do the same thing with Newman and make Newman speak as well. So, and I'm going to bump this down just a little bit for real estate. Actually, I can keep it the same if I don't pay attention as much to the slackety-dack. Okay, here we go. And this, zoom. Okay. Now let's bump back up. Lots going on with the console log, and there's a lot of noise in our console. In fact, we've gotten to the point where we understand that whatever is called with this keyword, that's the object that it gets. And what I'm driving home is that I can change this to be a new object. And I'm going to call lowercase Newman, and I'm going to get rid of this console log. Okay, and I'm going to call Newman. So there we go. There we have one constructor function and two objects being created from it and passing in their specific options to it. So if we look at our console, our first console.log is pointing to the Jerry object, okay, at the time that the new keyword is used. And then our second object is pointing to the so sorry, this was the Newman. So this, yeah, we'll call this this is the Jerry object and this is the Newman object. I'm confusing myself. So you can see what they both print. It says hello Newman and then hello Jerry, so on and so forth. And so that is our third principle of what gets, or how we can determine what this will be bound to. And so it's whenever a constructor function is used, the object created with the new keyword becomes this. Very helpful when building out objects, because you don't know, these are all objects. You have no clue what this is going to be pointing to when you're building out this constructor function. So it's all dependent on what this object that comes in. So you don't have to say, this sets this stuff up on the object that comes out of it. So like when we call Jerry, that's what happens. So when you say, oh, speak Jerry, Jerry must be some sort of object. Well, it's going to be bound to whatever the new keyword gets, which is a little bit more sophisticated than the way that we implicitly bound it in our second principle. Okay, this is still implicit because this keyword is implying that you're giving it some sort of context, but we are setting that context when we pass in our object with the new keyword. Any other questions so far? Chris, does it make a little bit more sense as to why this is useful? The idea is that you have to see it. Well, this is always how it's been done in JavaScript. If you had come from another programming language, there's keywords. Okay, outside of JavaScript, if you came from there's keywords like self, and this is used in other programming languages. It really if this is your first programming language and this is brand new to you, just take heart, because you are not alone, number one. And if I can learn about this, then you can too. I guarantee it. It just takes time. It takes practice. And especially when you get to React, you're going to be using this keyword all the time. We use it with classical-based inheritance, which is what I'm going to touch on at the end of this stuff. There's essentially a whole other way that we could rewrite this. Okay. The last principle of this keyword that I want to touch on today is what we call explicit binding. Okay? An explicit binding is going to be whenever JavaScript's native .call .apply are used, and even the .bind method. Okay. So we used the call method earlier when we were dealing with whatchamacallit, that function, that cache function, right? So if I wanted to give an object a new context, if I wanted to say, I want these speak functions to be completely swapped, okay, I can feed it a new context. This is how you do that. I would say something to the effect of Jerry.speak, and let's get rid of these so you don't see them anymore. So I'm going to say Jerry.speak, but I'm going to first call it. What does the call keyword do? Let's figure that out real quick. Calls a method of an object, substituting another object for the current object. What the crap? So the object that this is pointing to in this context, and when speak is going to be called, would be Jerry's object, right? But what's going to happen when I call and pass it Newman? Boom, boom, boom. Jerry, we called Jerry. okay? We call .speak Jerry, but we explicitly set the object that is left of the dot to be Newman. So now we can see that when I call Jerry in this context, with .call being applied, that Jerry is now saying, hello, Jerry, as Newman. Okay? And then the same thing would happen if we used Newman and passed Newman Jerry. You would expect the same exact thing to happen, the same tomfoolery. Newman himself was this object. Hello, Newman. So it gets a new context, right? But I can use this other method called apply. And apply calls the function. So this is the difference. If anyone ever asks you this in a JavaScript interview, apply calls the function substituting for the specific object for this value of the function and a specified array for the arguments of the function. So if our function, for example, took a bunch of arguments, you could essentially pass in an array of different arguments. So if our function took a bunch of arguments here, let's say, just look at args. Okay. Come on, Newman. So right now, I'm going to get rid of that line. Right now, you can see this console log is not really printing us anything. But if I were to pass some stuff, let's see what it starts to print. A is not defined. Check it out. So if your function that you're trying to invoke is being called with apply, you can explicitly set what the object should be that's being called and then say, call it with this. So I can override this whole process by saying Jerry, and I can say something to the effect of if, I don't know what I want to say here. So if, how do I want to go about doing this? Args.length is greater than 0. Then set this dot greeter to be equal to args at 0. And this is very like specific. So now, even though this is ridiculous, this is like totally a contrived example, okay? But the person doing the greeting is, we have swapped who is doing what now. So now let me see this dot greeter. This would actually we'd want to make this argument Newman in this sense. Hello, Newman. See how I've overwritten that? Just by, and that's like not necessarily the best example of why you would pass arguments when you're explicitly binding, but that's the difference between apply and call. Call just simply takes an object and allows you to, pass that object and explicitly bind the context of that object, okay? Apply does the same thing, but you can take an array of arguments. So those are the differences. So if anyone ever asks you, what is the difference between .call and apply? You can think of it as because apply starts with A, you can get an array as the second argument of arguments, okay? So apply, since it starts with A, can take in an array of arguments. Do you want to argue with me about that? Just kidding. That was a stupid pun. I'm about to be a dad for the first time, so I need to get my dad puns going up. Going strong. Okay, so who's like, let's just pulse real quick. Polly is going to ask you, WTF is this? I got this. I can teach it to others. Let's just do a 1 through 5 poll. So if 1 is you are like just in the deep end and you're like, Ryan, this is just not making any sense And let me make this poll anonymous. And 5 is I could teach this to a significant other. And if you are 1s and 2s, I want you to turn those into questions. I guess the main question is, why is this useful? And I'm about to get to that. But is there anything provided on this screen that you're just like, what the crap? Well, let me zoom with the double tap of my finger. This first line straight from Mozilla is the line I want you to 100% just ingrain into your memory forever, for long term. For the next time anyone ever brings this up, you know, oh, I know what that means. This keyword is determined by how a function is called. In the examples that I provided, I called a function every single time, okay? Right, this is example number 3. This is number 4, actually. So principle 4, we have the speak example where we're explicitly setting it. We have the new keyword example. We have the say hello, but these are all calling functions, right? So it's all about how a function is called. And we use functions to create objects in JavaScript. You can use functions to create objects. Yeah, it'll make a lot more sense when you jump into this file in your JavaScript 2 module that you've been working on. Okay, so it can be set by assigning the duration or assignment during execution, and it may be different each time a function is called. So syntax, this. I love that. They provided this entire header and code block just for syntax, this. Okay, so this is the global context. We just went over this. This will equal the window in this context. This is in web browsers. In Node, it's the console object. The function context is a simple call, just like we did earlier. So function F1, return this. You know, F1, whatever returns is going to be set to the window. In Node, it'll be the global object. Okay? So none of this is new. I just showed you this. I'm just rehashing it, okay? In strict mode, however, the value of this remains. Okay, so don't worry about strict mode. Ignore strict mode. We have Babel now, okay? All right, pass the value of this from one context to another. Use, call, or apply. So look at this. What's going on here? Object equals A, custom, okay? Our A now is going to be global, okay? So object A, now A is global. So A is global in this context. Cool. And object here, A is set to custom, so nested within this block. So now we have a function that takes in some sort of argument and returns this .a. What happens? What's this gets called? The first time it's called, what is this pointing to? It's pointing to global context. The second time it's called, we call it with .call, and we say, hey, it's pointing to custom now. We call it with this object. So we call it passing in this object, this function was called, pass in this object, same thing with apply. Although they're not getting too tricky with apply here like I did. This is where they're going to get a little tricky with apply. Check it out. We have a function called add. I love this. This is my favorite example for apply and call. Let's dissect this. Let's build this from the ground up. And then I will help you do more of this. Like you're going to get so much exposure to this tomorrow too. So Don't freak out if you don't get it today, or if it's just like really just bogging you down. Don't worry about it. Okay, so check it out. When I call, okay, so here's my object. When I call add, it's taking in some arguments, and check it out. this dot A, which is pointing to really nothing at this point, gets this dot B plus this plus C plus D. So those are two arguments that are going to be fed in. This will refer to the object that's passed when add is called. I love this. Okay, so I call add, and I explicitly bind it to what object? What is the object that I'm passing in here? What line is that object defined on? Change this to const. Yes. Sorry, I was highlighting the line. Okay, so it was on that line, right? So I say add, call the function, but then I apply an object to it, and I pass it an object. And look, even call, and I don't know if I said this properly then, even call can take some extra arguments. So what do these arguments become? And Randy and Chris, you're both correct. But what do these arguments become when I call add? What variables? What letters? C and D, right? Same thing down here, but it's accepting an array of arguments this time. So that's the difference between even apply and call are used the exact same. However, with apply, we use an array instead of just chaining a bunch of commas. It's just like, hey, put in an array and put commas there too. I don't know. I don't know when one would be used better over another. But now you've seen a really good example of this. This is straight from MDN. I freaking love that. And then there's this bind method. What is going on with bind? And this is a problem. Not a problem. It's just this. It's deeper. We'll go into that more tomorrow. Well, no, because I think you need it for the homework. Let's just go into this file in the homework. Close my notes for a minute. Okay, so this is interesting because it's asking us to build a class called user. So that's what you need to know for this as well. Let me just open that other file back up. Nope, I don't want a new workspace. Okay, let's talk about the class keyword real quick, and then we will. I will jump into your homework assignment. I don't like to call it homework, but whatever, because you do it at, well, you guys, you always do it at home. So, could you use multi-dimensional arrays with apply? If you're expecting one of your arguments to be an array, for example, if one of my parameters should be an array, then yes, this would work. In this case, it's not going to do anything, but it ought to work. Oh, Quokka's not on. Come on, Quokka. That makes sense? Yeah, Sure. I'm having a hard time like stretching myself to figure out exactly the use case for that, but definitely could. If you, I mean, you just to prove a point that you can pass, apply as a function like any other. It's got some different rules assigned to it, but like it's a function, so you can pass whatever arguments you want. But the difference between apply and call is we get an array of arguments over just a couple of arguments. Oh yeah, and it was undefined in this context with array the first time we were calling it from down here. So yeah, that's why we're calling, because we're calling with call and we didn't have an array here. But you could do the same thing with this and say this ought to work. It's a good question. First time we're calling it, array is defined because there's an array being passed in. R is defined, the third argument. Okay. But yeah, you can pass things around all you want. Functions allow you to pass things around to them. Okay, so there's this idea of the class keyword. So in fact, what I'm going to do is before I even set you free on the homework tonight, I'm going to actually make you go and like write this out in a text editor. So I'm going to make you go to the class keyword, and you are going to look for the class keyword in JavaScript. So these documentations, let's see. Nope, that's not it. Yep, this is it. So class in HTML and class in JavaScript are very different. Okay, so don't get caught up on the same thing, but let's have you guys follow this pattern here. Okay, and then we're just going to do the top level and extends. We'll talk about it at a different time. So we get this idea of the class keyword, okay? And a lot of this comes from like, a lot of people giving JavaScript flack that it's not true object-oriented programming because there is no class in JavaScript. But it's just we sort of have been faking classes all along. Okay, but now we have the class keyword and people are like, oh yeah, JavaScript gets the class keyword, and then they come in from another language and they're like, I know nothing about this. I can't do anything with this, okay? So let's talk about this polygon and square syntax, okay? So let's call it polygon and square constructor. And I'm gonna have you guys go and create new objects from within this. And you're gonna be able to assign these prototypes. But let's build our constructor class first, okay? So our first thing we wanna do is say class polygon, and that's it. It's as simple as that. It's a special constructor function syntax that makes us all warm and fuzzy because we come from Java. Not to diss on Java. Java is a fantastic programming language. For web, JavaScript just seems a little bit more well-suited. Except there are problems with JavaScript single-threaded engine, blah, 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 but you don't need to worry too much about those. Okay, so what do we have here? We have polygon. So if I just simply console.log our polygon, see what it gives us. Well, check it out. It's an anonymous function. Why is that an anonymous function? I thought we just gave it I thought it was an object. Why would this say it's a Lambda function? Why would this say it's anonymous? What's going on here? Well, I alluded to it earlier when I said that this is a constructor function under the hood. It's nothing more than that. It just gives us a little bit warm and fuzzy syntax here. So within this function, I can build within this class, I can call what's called constructor, which gets called at the time that we invoke polygon with a new keyword. Okay? So our constructor is what's going to do all the class building. You think of it as like your body of workers, right? They're going to go and actually do the work for you. You're going to provide them the blueprints, but the constructor actually knows what to do in that situation. Okay, so I think they said from the MDN docs, it says this dot name equals polygon, this dot height equals height, and this dot width equals width. Okay. So another note here is note that super used in the constructor can only be using constructors and must be called before the this keyword can be used. So super is a different thing, and we're going to get to that in 1 second. But with this, let us, no pun intended there, let's say that this dot name equals polygon. This dot height equals some sort of like property. I don't want to call it that. I want to call it object dot height. This dot width equals object dot width. Now this object is going to be passed into our constructor class at the time that we use the new keyword. So where do we need to define this object? It's a parameter. We're going to feed it to a function. So where do I need to pass this? How do I need to let my class constructor know about this? The object. I'm going to call polygon when I say const new shape equals new polygon, and I'm going to feed it a width of, I don't know, 300 and a height 300. That would be a perfect square, wouldn't it? So where do I need to define this object? This object is not defined. I'm calling object right here. It needs to be passed into my constructor function. Okay? So this syntax, if I was to create a constructor function called polygon, we'll do it camel case so that it doesn't choke on us, and say object, this dot name equals polygon. Same thing. Oh, new shame. Shame on me. Awesome. See how the two are different? But they're doing the same exact thing, guys. So do not get caught up on this syntax. Just know that instead of supplying our constructor function with those object options, you pass them into your constructor inside of a class, okay? So this sort of gives us a warm and fuzzy syntax that we're all excited to be learning about when we get to JavaScript now. But it's very important you understand this, and you get a lot of practice with this. And we go, this is just exposing you to it. Today, because of React, I would say in more modern front-end development, class keyword is used more. And you'd see this as well in like Angular 2 or whatever version of Angular we're on now, like 4 or 5 is about to come out. Yeah, and they're otherwise equivalent, absolutely. But you get a few benefits. And one of the benefits you get is a couple of other keywords, and one of those is extends. So if I was to actually not create these objects and just, let's get rid of my constructor function, okay? I would say that you could basically do this. You could do the same thing here. And this is where, this is where we're going to get into the object creation later on. But I already ran out of time. Okay, so let's do this. Let's say class square extends polygon. This is where the benefits of having the class keyword start to come in handy. Because we are referencing an object called polygon, or sorry, we're referencing a class called polygon, which we're extending its properties to us. Okay, so from the docs, going over to the docs, we get this idea that we can actually call our constructor and we can actually set our name explicitly. And then, yeah, okay, let's just figure out what that does. Let's take a look at square now when we create a new square. Because we get length now passed into the constructor as square. Okay, height and width, length, probably height times weight length. Doesn't show us an example of how we can call new square, but let's play around with it. Okay, so this constructor, our function, constructor, gets, what did they call that, length? And now, in order to inherit the things that come down from this constructor, we can just simply call super. And what super does is well, we're actually inheriting through the extends. I said that wrong. Super actually allows us to pass things back up to our parent function. So it's like this thing that allows us, when you're extending, just know that you need, and you're passing new properties, our main class needs to simply know about those properties. That's kind of what super does there. And then I can say this dot name equals square. So now if I first console.log square with a capital S, it's going to be, well, it's not going to give us much there because it's just saying it's an anonymous function as well. Ooh, I would love that, Alexander. Cool. Okay, so if I wanted to create this new square and say const new square equals new square, I would need to pass it a height, so an object with a height. Height. Width. And what else does my object need? I think we could pass it some sort of length, but the length should be height times width. So we would want to make a function that actually, like, the length. This is throwing me off because it's square is length and length, super length. Like, yeah, it's just weird how they come up with an example, but they don't like show you exactly what that example should be used for. So, but if we go to the extends, let's see. Let's look for super real quick. Here we go. There we go. That's what we're doing. They set, okay, so they set a getter, which is great. This is good. Okay, so that's what they're doing with this. And then when they call, okay, and then you use this with humor. Okay, so I'm going to give you these docs too. And I want you to reference those and just yeah, super cool. Okay, we have so many better examples for this. Okay, it's gonna be fantastic. And yeah, so this super, what you need to know is it's calling the parent constructor is essentially what's going on. So taken from the super keyword is used to access and call functions on an object's parent. The parent object is polygon and super is calling that parent's constructor. So I could simply call, super prop and super expression. We could call that through the class keyword like that. So I wonder if they have, yeah, it's cool. So you see here they have a polygon, and then they call P equals new polygon. Let me zoom. Let's see where they extend it. Okay, here we go. Super length. So now if I call S equals new square, S dot say name, we can get the name. So check it out. We can get the name of the parent. There is no say name function on this child. Okay, the square extends polygon. And we're calling square dot say name, right? Or S dot say name. And we are simply supplying it with the ability to call the say name function, which is defined up here. And then we can see what this is pointing to. Man, I'm super excited to teach you all this tomorrow. Okay, so now what I want you to do real quick before I let you go for the evening is I'm going to have you build, so here's a constructor function, right? Let me just get rid of everything up above. So here's a constructor function. Sorry. Let's say, and this constructor function is the same way that we've always done it since the beginning of JavaScript. Person, and this person constructor function takes in an options object. Okay? And the options that I want you to define, this dot name equals whatever name you pass it. And we'll do the same thing for age. We'll say occupation. Most of y'all are students. Some of you have occupations as you're doing this. And then we'll say favorite food. Okay? So then you're going to say const me equals this object. And you're going to define all these properties. So everyone, this is where you're following along with me. Okay, to get this constructor function built. Whoops. I don't know what my occupation is. What is my favorite food? I don't even know. Okay. And then you are going to do the same thing, but your object is going to look like you. Okay. And then go ahead and create a new object called your name. So I'm going to say const Ryan equals new person and pass it the me object. And copy and paste your solution into Slack. Copy and paste this object that gets printed out so you can find it from the console and just say like this. Whoops. So give me the output of your person constructor. Yours may look a little different and depending on what context you're using it in. With Quokka, it gives me the person constructor. Nice, Ira. Maduros, all right. Ira, have you ever had like authentic empanadas? We had neighbors growing up in the neighborhood that I lived in that were, they were Argentine. And they would come over like monthly and cook us chicken milanesa and empanadas. And it was like the best day of my life every month. Kalbi, nice. Some Korean food there. Village Idiot, come on. SeaWorld team member. I love it. Is that, if that's true, that's awesome. Student of the things. Nice. Ellie, Apple enthusiast there. Oh man, John, I should have said wings. What was I thinking? I freaking love buffalo wings. My wife would tell you that that's my favorite food of all time. Chipotle, nice. By the way, you can make up your age. You don't need to put your true age if you don't want to. But I think age is just a number. We are all undefined. I love it. Nice. Okay. Dude, Wingstop is awesome. Okay, so now that I've shown you that there is a way to take what you have done and change the syntax around a bit, I want you to take the next 10 minutes and no more, and I want you to refactor your constructor function, your person constructor, to be a class. Okay? And once you get it, so you can do it right here in line, this is the way that I would do this, is I would just take this code and I would just refactor it to look a lot like this. Okay? All right. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to save this as a secret gist on my GitHub. And I'm going to give you a link to the gist, and I'm going to let you do this. And then if you work on it for 10 minutes until 3:30 Pacific, then jump back with your partners at 3:30 and give each other help and feedback. If you don't have a partner, just work on it until you get a solution to your person constructor class. So remember, Polygon, and I'm getting a bunch of errors here, so disregard that. Polygon has already been declared. Ask me if I care. I'll just delete that one. Okay, saving as secret gist right meow. Constructor function class keyword. This. Okay. So use that secret gist that you all have access to. It's not so secret if you have the link to it. And basically take your person, your goal is to take your person constructor and turn it into a class. And then once you have done that, from the file that I have just showed you, you have everything you need to be able to complete this assignment. And that assignment is the this keyword assignment. So the this keyword assignment does not have any tests written for it. Okay, just to clarify on how you're going to test this, you are going to console.log your functions, okay? The way that I have done, and there's plenty of examples of how to do it, okay? So if you console log result, you should be able to see the right result there, okay? And then this is going to be pretty much, this is going to be a stretch to be able to complete all of these. In fact, I don't expect you to complete the bind tonight, but you could potentially in the next hour and a half get through the call and apply portion after creating what you need to create here. So that's what you're working on the remainder of the afternoon and evening, is the this file in your JavaScript 2 homework assignment. Okay? And if you haven't finished recursion, that's okay. Just move on. Tomorrow, first thing after our code challenge solution, I'll give you a solution for check matching leaves. And then we are going to dive deep into the prototype and class tomorrow. So all of this is just going to help you be prepared for that. It's going to be super fun. Okay? And then by the end of it all, you're going to be so fluent in creating JavaScripts with the JavaScript objects with the class keyword. It's going to be awesome. All right. If you need any help, definitely reach out in Slack. We'll be actively engaged in the help channel. Yeah, have fun. Thanks for hanging out with me, guys. It's been a pleasure.